Huples cat. Of course, one of the other things is poverty, increasing poverty across the board everywhere. There's no real way around that because the economics of the situation means that without strong lockdowns, the virus went rampant and people were too scared to go and shop or buy services like having their nails cut and their hair done. Speaking of which, Kitty did my hair. She didn't do a bad job, eh? One of the economic effects of this is probably I won't ever give a hairdresser money again. But she did a good job. However, her eyesight's going because she's old, so I'm a bit worried I'll be able to keep this going. So one of the major economic effects, and you'll see this from the French expose, is that a lot of people experience poverty for the first time. And we're not talking about a lot of people, we're talking about millions, right? We're not talking about 10,000 people in a city that's had its factory shut. We're talking about millions of people in Canada, millions of people, tens of millions in America.
I'm not working at the moment. I have nothing left.
We're putting our shame aside. And if our children are hungry, we'll get food for them.
And today, we're taking a look at the economic damage from the coronavirus here in France. 2 confinements, travel bans, and months of other restrictions have upended the job market. As many as 1 million French people could be plunged into poverty, and many made a good living before COVID-19. We begin with a look at the new faces of poverty here in France.
In the wake of the COVID pandemic, NGOs estimate some 1 million people will be pushed into poverty by the end of the year in France. They come from varied backgrounds, but all are earning less than 1,060 euros per month. 3 years ago, this interior designer bought and restored an old farmhouse. It's proved a popular location for weddings and seminars. That's until COVID came along. In order to pay her mortgage and bills, Claire applied for income support.
Financially, I had to get past this barrier somehow. So it's just for a few months, and I hope that as soon as possible I'll be able to say, here's the money, there are others who need it.
Pascal is the owner of a small business in the events industry. Since the beginning of the crisis, all he's received is 1,500 euros in one-off state benefits. His turnover has already dropped by 80%. 6 out of 8 of his employees have been furloughed, and he hasn't been able to pay his own salary since March.
We won't start up again before 2021 or 2022. I have shows cancelled until November of 2021.
Pascal's health is suffering. He's lost 10 kilos, and his blood pressure is at 18.
The banks force us to be personal guarantors by committing our personal assets. That means that if tomorrow my company can't make its payments, my whole life will collapse.
It's also put a strain on his mental health.
I'm sad, obviously. I'm sorry.
And it's unpleasant. Poverty causes health to fail. It causes instability in employment and schooling and housing and a whole bunch of other things. It's terrible. The effects are terrible. And as I keep saying, the governments needed to, where they could, mitigate that by welfare transfers. Relying on occasional checks or relying on charity is a really bad idea when the problem is mega.
Charities have also been impacted by the COVID crisis. They rely heavily on volunteers and have seen their ranks deeply cut. One reason for that, older people tend to volunteer in large numbers, but have been avoiding social situations due to being most at risk. So while donations are actually up, charities lack the manpower to get that help where it's needed most.
Because if that large number of people do not find their way back into the economy, back in terms of buying and selling, the capitalist system's going to have a hard time. Now, according to Home Depot, the capitalist system's doing just great and everything will be fine by April when the COVID goes away because everybody's been vaccinated.
Mike just laid out a pretty strong case for the optimism that's out there in the economy, and certainly that would bode well for retail and consumers to have a cyclical recovery off of vaccine. But so many of these problems for retailers are more structural in nature, and they were plaguing them before the pandemic. So what's the outlook for the sector, and who wins and loses into next year?
Well, I think, the people are going to win in terms of retailers are those that will be fully connected to the people they're serving, which are their customers. And that's finding ways to make the in-store experience unique, to make sure that human relationship is established. In our own cases, in terms of our golf business, our PGA Tour superstores, our golf business has been incredible this year. People are still coming in for golf fittings and lessons and apparel and whatever else, and they love being outside and playing the game. So we've seen a tremendous amount of positive activity in the golf business. I think it's going to create a challenge for us, as many people have gotten used to shopping e-commerce in a variety of other ways. And I think actually it could be a way to expand the universe, if you will. So it gives the retailers a chance to apply some new knowledge, some new techniques, new ways to reach the customers they're serving, and yet to still offer the in-store experience. People still love being connected to other human beings, love being connected in the store, getting product knowledge, having levels of service, being able to feel and touch the products they're buying. So, I would agree. I think particularly come April or thereabouts, when we have these 3 vaccines available to us in some significant numbers and on through 2021, I should say, I think things are going to be very positive.
Now, I do think, given anti-vax rates in every country, that to say that the majority of the population will be vaccinated by April or even the end of April 2021 is absolutely ludicrous. To actually claim that we have vaccines and syringes and needles to do that is ludicrous. But it's all of the bullying up of the economy. You know, if you individually can't feed your kids, if you individually have ran out of your emergency 3-month, 6-month fund because this has been going on for 10 months, it's not the government's responsibility, it's certainly not big business's responsibility, it's your fault and it's your problem. And that kind of selfish greed, free marketism, which works well in an upswinging economy, really hurts people in a downswinging economy. But we don't have that. What we have is a stalled economy. What we have is a Great Depression about to rip right the way through all of our countries. None of us are safe here.
Tis the season for holiday shopping, and while you can see there are definitely still lines here in front of stores at Bergen Town Center, the pandemic is definitely keeping more shoppers in front of their computer screens. People rushing stores on Thanksgiving night have become a Black Friday tradition. But you'll find none of that this year at Bergen Town Center. There are still plenty of people, but lines are shorter in a pandemic.
They want stuff. What am I going to do?
Expectations for big discounts are still high.
Some good deals, I guess.
The pandemic didn't stop some from showing up early. 5 a.m. early at Willowbrook Mall.
I got here around 11:40, I'm going to say, and I came for the PS5.
Many who ventured out say they prefer to shop in person. Experts predict most shopping will be done at home. Today and Cyber Monday expected to be the busiest days in history for online shopping, and retailers will likely spread deals throughout the month to cut down on crowds. Those heading to stores say in-person shopping still has its perks.
And that kind of short-term and wishful thinking is going to very much damage us all. Of course, no surprise that divorce rates have skyrocketed.
It's a new season, but the shock is still settling. Tara Mandarano says, in the middle of a global pandemic, her own world shattered.
I know there's been so much loss in the world, so many people sick and dying and losing jobs, and from my little corner of the universe, I just feel like it's kind of another disaster in my personal life that I kind of chalk up to another casualty of COVID.
Tara's marriage ended this past August, a reflection of a painful pandemic trend that is quietly rippling across the country. There are no hard statistics, but a lot of anecdotal evidence. While the pandemic has strengthened some relationships, it has also pushed many partnerships over the edge.
I think the normal everyday stress that you would have in a marriage or a family, it just became toxic. The pandemic made it more toxic.
Stress that you already had, coupled with the new economic and COVID stresses, is killing a lot of marriages, causing a lot of pain and suffering. And no surprise that gender violence against women and young girls, and against men, but mostly against women, is also phenomenally high.
The United Nations has called it a shadow pandemic, one that has intensified during this COVID-19 public health crisis. Shelters across Canada are seeing a disturbing escalation of violence against women and girls during this pandemic, as crisis calls have also dramatically increased.
With COVID-19, it really was, a pandemic within a pandemic.
This year, at least 10 women are on Toronto's homicide list. In at least 7 cases, men have been charged with their deaths. Frontline workers report seeing higher frequency of abuse in all forms, particularly physical attacks and specifically stabbing, strangulations, forced confinement, sexual violence, and increased human trafficking. The survey states COVID-19 has made it more difficult for women to leave.
Public health messaging was clearly to stay home. But, if home was not safe, then, it was important for us to get out the message that you don't need to stay home, that there were alternatives.
Another chilling report, Ontario's annual femicide list featuring the names of 35 women suspected of being killed by men. The youngest, just 4 years old. The oldest, a 95-year-old woman from Toronto.
Every time you get an economic contraction, every time you get a restriction on mobility by a population, people who are having issues will have those issues worse. No surprise. I just want to address schools. Schools should have been shut for a year. They should have spent the money and the time trying to keep the schools open on having 1 to 3 hour rotational things in all local communities that are easily to walk to, so kids can go and play, learn a little bit about nature and eat nice food. School teachers could have been redeployed to that. No reason why schools had to be kept open. It's not helping anybody there. It's going to be a disastrous year. Nobody's going to see this year as proof of academic anything, because everybody knows it's a big mess. And the truth is, most of our children, most of them, don't have adequate supervision, don't have adequate food, don't have adequate access to internet, don't have adequate access to help with homework, and are falling behind and probably suffering mentally because of that. It's a two-pronged thing. It's a quick fix to open the schools, but that boosts COVID, which makes the pandemic worse. But at the same time, not every kid going to school is actually getting a normal schooling experience. But I would argue none of them are. So I'm in Newmarket, and this is actually Fairy Lake, and rather than N95s and decent pay rise, they did this for us. Great. Means nothing. So the economy is going to go in the tank. Things like the police station over there, it's being relocated on the outskirts of the city right now. There'll be less police, less everything. There won't be any money for it. And that is Fairy Lake. We're going to plunge into it. One of the things about Fairy Lake is that actually the divorce clips that I showed, with the red-headed lady who's fortunately been divorced, and she blames COVID for it, amongst other things. It was actually filmed here, and it was kind of fun. So I'll actually show you the bridge she walked across and all that sort of stuff. But I want to get out of this video to give you a sense that the world that was isn't coming back. Things will fundamentally change. We're all looking into crystal balls and trying to guess how. The truth is, none of us really know how the future's going to pan out from this point. All we can really do is try and do the best job we can, try and stay as cheerful as we can, because things are going to be fundamentally different if we get vaccines that work. If we don't, we've got this for a bit longer. This is a Hungry Kitten production 2020.